Sally happy day, my guitarist friends. Welcome back to another video. And today we're looking at the neuroscience of music and emotion. Not in a boring textbook way, but in a way that helps you see music differently and listen to music differently, whether you create it yourself or just listen to it. We're going to break down a few key ideas today. And by the end of the video, you're not just going to understand why music makes you feel a certain thing. You'll also know how to use it in your own playing to portray specific emotions. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now, one of the coolest things in musical neuroscience is the fact that your brain doesn't just listen to music, it's predicting what it thinks is going to happen. Every note, every chord, every beat, every rhythm. You get the idea. If I play something simple and predictable like this, then you realise that without even playing the last note, your brain knew what that last note was going to be, the C. And that prediction process plays a huge part in why we feel emotion when we're listening to music. Now, let's go into a little bit more detail with the auditory cortex, which we talked about in my last video there. So what the auditory cortex does is it tries to complete what you're hearing at the moment, saying, oh, this note is going to go up, or it's going to go down, or it's going to repeat, or you get the idea. Now, when the music follows the pattern that you're expecting in your head, you get a small reward. But this reward isn't that big, and it doesn't explain why we feel big emotion when listening to music. The real emotion comes from something called prediction errors. Now, what's a prediction error? It's the moments in music where that pattern breaks, but it does it in a good way. So if I hold a dominant 5 chord for a long time, that tension that you'd feel, that's your brain waiting for its prediction to be fulfilled. And when it finally does happen, boom, dopamine. As you gooners would know, delay gratification. But it's not just rhythm that this happens with. It also happens with pitch. Say you're listening to a song and you're expecting it to go back to the home chord, but instead it modulates up, meaning it changes key. Then your brain gets confused and it breaks the pattern because it subverts your expectations, but not in a bad way. Now, following this, yes, your brain does act differently, depending on the type of surprise. If something follows exactly what your prediction is, you're obviously going to get a small reward. But if something's unexpected but fitting, you get a really big reward. But when something doesn't follow your prediction, but it's random and chaotic, you don't get any reward. In fact, you just get confusion. Now, why does this matter in songwriting? If you can understand the prediction that's going to be made, you can understand the musical emotion that you're going to get behind it. Say you're playing a song and you're holding on that 5 chord. You know that people are going to expect it to go back to the 1. But if you don't go back to the 1, then you can spark an emotional response in your listener. Hopefully in a good sense. Music is basically a conversation between what you expect and what you get. But this isn't the only factor in why music makes us feel emotion. Which brings us to the second idea, dopamine. Now here's a part that really shocks people. Music triggers the same reward chemical as eating food, winning a game, falling in love even. And that chemical is called dopamine, which I'm sure you've heard about before, especially if you've watched my previous videos. Now let's talk a little bit more about this brain's reward system. Inside the brain is a circuit called the mesolimbic pathway. It includes structures like the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, and the connections to the prefrontal cortex. Now these areas fire when you experience something rewarding. And the amazing thing is, music activates the same pathway as physical rewards do. Another thing that shocks a lot of people is that the dopamine rush you get listening to music doesn't actually occur during the actual emotional moment in the song. It happens just before, as you're anticipating it. Before the resolution, as you would know, tension is building massively. Your brain's getting excited because it's thinking, something's coming. And then you resolve the chord, or the note, or whatever you're playing. And that resolution gives you the second dopamine hit. So the emotional payoff in music comes in 2 sections. That before the moment, and that after the moment. And this is why good emotional songs build up the anticipation really well and tease the big moment before you actually get it. Next to that, why does some music give you chills instead of emotion? So chills, also known as frisson, happen when dopamine and adrenaline fire together, which adrenaline I'm sure you've heard of before. So certain things like modulations can have a really big impact, as you're not only firing the dopamine, but you're also firing the adrenaline. Now, how can this music be used in what we play? Creating tension in our music can pay off massively. The stronger the tension, the stronger the resolution. These unexpected twists can create strong emotional changes. And you can even use repetition to make you feel comfortable before you go somewhere different to further increase the emotional change that you're experiencing when you listen to the song. So, prediction gives us structure, dopamine gives us pleasure. But neither of those alone explain why music can make you cry, feel nostalgic, or even powerful. For that, we need to talk about the limbic system. It's the emotional core of the brain. Now, the limbic system is made up of a few parts that you probably know the name of. The amygdala, which is responsible for the emotional intensity of your music. The hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and the nostalgic feeling that we'll talk about later in the video. As well as the hypothalamus, which is the physical reactions that we get, like a heart rate increase, goosebumps, or even tears. Now, believe it or not, music reaches this system significantly faster than language or rational thought can. This means you can feel a chord change before you even have time to think about it. Now, the thing about the amygdala is that it responds directly to harmony. Different harmonies trigger different emotional responses. So when you hear a minor chord, you have a sense of sadness and longing, right? That's the amygdala recognizing the tension and instability of the note. Whereas if you play a major chord, the happiness and brightness comes from the emotional stability, as opposed to the instability of the other. And the amygdala relaxes instead of tensing. It's automatic, it's subconscious, and it happens in fractions of a second. Now, a really strong point is nostalgia. We all experience nostalgia watching, old Minecraft YouTubers, but we also get it from music. And what's responsible for this is a hippocampus. This is your memory center, and it is tightly linked to sound, which is what we're focused on, being musicians. Music literally pulls these memories forwards into your mind. Sometimes even memories that you don't even remember, which is pretty trippy if you ask me. Now, the hypothalamus. This responds to the intense emotional signals, and it reacts with physical changes. So this is you getting goosebumps, chills, or a racing heart, or even tears when you're listening to music. These aren't metaphors. Your body is genuinely reacting to the emotional data carried by the sound. Now, why does this matter in our music writing? Understanding how certain chords create certain emotion can help you portray what you want to when you're writing the song, which ties in perfectly with the next section. When we talk about music and emotion, it's easy to default to cliches. Oh, major is happy, minor is sad. But the real neuroscience behind why chords feel the way they do is so much deeper and so much more interesting than that. So let's look at how the brain actually breaks down specific kinds of harmonies. Now, when you play two notes together, they're one of two things: consonant or dissonant. Consonant intervals, like perfect fifths or major thirds, create smooth, regular wave patterns. Your auditory cortex finds these easy to process, so they often feel stable, pleasant, and resolved. On the other hand, dissonant intervals, like minor seconds or tritones, create irregular, rapidly beating waves. These demand more neural work to decode, which your brain interprets as tension or unresolved anger. Neuroscientific studies into music show that consonant intervals activate reward pathways really quickly, while dissonant intervals activate areas like conflict detection and prediction error, which are the same circuits that fire when something unexpected happens in real life. And that's why even non-musicians react to harmonies emotionally. The brain doesn't need to understand a theory to feel the actual physics behind it. So let's talk more about major and minor chords. The major third has a frequency ratio of 5/4, which is really smooth. Your auditory cortex doesn't take much effort to process it as stable and bright. Whereas the minor third has a frequency ratio of 6/5, which means it takes a lot more effort from the auditory cortex to process it, but not enough to sound jarring, so it just feels somber and introspective. And your brain recognizes these and links it to emotions you feel in the real world. So, what do unresolved chords do? Chords such as suspended chords don't have a major or minor third in it, so they often feel quite floaty and unresolved. This means that our brain doesn't know whether it's going to be happy or it's going to be sad, and we're waiting for it to either pull down or pull up, so we can predict it and know what to feel. This is why ambient and cinematic music leans on suspended chords. They keep you in a sort of emotional limbo. So this is why even people who aren't musicians feel that tension. It's not just a brain thinking, oh, that's a minor chord, so I'm going to be unhappy. It's a brain being like, oh, way more effort. Unlike major chords, which are a lot more easy to process, and the brain can be lazy when processing it. So now that we've talked about harmony and chords, it's time to zoom in a little bit more and look at something more personal and emotional. Melodies. If chords set the emotional landscape, melodies are the characters that walk through it. They're the parts that we hum, that we get stuck on our head when we can't remember the rest. And underneath all of that is a surprising bit of neuroscience. The intervals between the melodies that we're playing shape the emotion that we feel when we're listening to it. Your brain doesn't just hear the singular notes playing one after another. It tracks the distance between them, how fast they move, how high or low they are, and whether they match what your brain expects, as we talked about before. Now, the brain treats melody like speech. One of the biggest insights into modern musical neuroscience is that music and speech share a lot of the same neural real estate. When you sing a melody, your brain processes it similarly to how it processes the emotional tone in someone's voice. For example, a minor third mirrors the acoustic shape of a sad voice, which in turn makes us also feel sad. And when a melody moves in small steps, it feels personal, close, and introspective, because it resembles normal human speech. When people talk softly or thoughtfully, their pitch tends to move in smaller steps, and the brain associates this with lower arousal emotions, like calmness or relaxation. That's why when you listen to a ballad, it usually starts off using small intervals before it jumps up. Now, speaking of big melodic jumps, they activate the brain's attention. Going up like a perfect fifth or an octave or even further creates a spike in emotional arousal. They feel heroic and dramatic, or even sometimes overwhelming, depending on how they're used. These leaps resemble emotional speech. Think of someone shouting across a room. Humans don't naturally leap in huge intervals in casual talking. So large melodic jumps are read as emotional exaggeration or overwhelmingness. So in pieces like film scores, they have this epic, soaring feeling by jumping up massively in pitch to make you feel that sense of dramatic, heroic awesomeness. But it's not just about the actual distance between them, but it's also the consonants of these intervals. Like how a major sixth can feel romantic or hopeful, whereas a minor sixth feels haunting. Your brain has built associations between these sounds and emotional tone in someone's voice. And an interesting thing about this is that it's not just about the intervals in between them, it's the contour of the entire melody itself. Like Edward Van Halen always said, it's not about the specific notes he played, but it's where he started and where he ended up and the actual shape of the melody itself. Your brain is paying attention to that shape. Ascending shapes, they're uplifting and energetic, whereas descending shapes feel much more resolved. But wave-like shapes feel soothing and balanced. Following these same principles, chaotic shapes that go all over the place will obviously feel quite chaotic. So make sure to keep this in mind when you're writing melodies of your own. If you understand what you want it to feel like, you can base your shape off that and have a building block on further melodic construction that you want to do. Okay, so up to this point in the video, we've talked about a lot of the brain's physical responses. So your dopamine, your mesolimbic pathways, your limbic systems, all that stuff. But there's another part, if not the hugest part of the puzzle. Music isn't just biology, it's culture and it's learning. It's the environment that you grow up and live in. Two people from different musical backgrounds can hear the exact same chord and feel exact opposite emotions. And neuroscience can actually explain why this happens. So your brain learns rules of music before you've even realised it. As a kid, you absorb all kinds of things, like the music your parents play, the music your culture promotes, your environment, and even your social groups. This creates an internal model, a subconscious map of what music should be like. So for example, Western music, major sounds happy, minor sounds sad, all that jazz, which we've grown up knowing. So when we hear something happy, we're like, oh, that's a major chord, or oh, that's a minor chord if it's sad. Because we've learnt that through musical tradition. But if you take a listener from other places like the Middle East or India, they won't associate major and minor in the same way that we do, because their music uses different tunings, different scales, and different emotional patterns. Emotion in music is partly biological, but the emotional vocabulary is the cultural. So let me give you a few examples of around the world on how this changes. In the Western world, we have a 12-tone system, which is just one way of dividing the octave. In Arabic Makam, they use microtones, which breaks down the notes that we use even further. So to Westerners, this can sound really weird, but if you've grown up knowing it and listening to it, then your brain associates with it and it doesn't sound as weird as what we would call it. Indian raga has specific emotional associations tied to the time of day, the season, and the performance tradition. Japanese music often uses pentatonic scales that can feel calm or spacious when compared to Western harmony. Someone outside of these cultures won't fully understand those within the culture, so the emotional cues that they're trying to create won't have that same effect. Your brain can only assign emotional cues to the musical patterns that it's learned to expect. If it can't expect it, it can't have the emotional attachment to it. Even rhythms in music is not universal. Us Westerners use mostly 3/4, 4/4, things like that. But many other cultures use much more complex rhythms. Take West African drumming, which uses polyrhythms to create interlocking emotional layers. Or Balkan music that uses 7 or even 9/8, which can feel completely unnatural to people outside of the tradition. Or Indian Tala cycles, which can be 5, 10 or even 14 beats long. Each have a unique emotional shape that again, others won't understand. If you didn't grow up with these musical patterns, your prediction machinery doesn't know how to process them. So where you have the biology part of the emotions in music, which is completely universal and everyone experiences it, You have the cultural parts that shape how these emotional, biological things are used when we're listening to music. So, music isn't just magic, but sometimes it feels like it is, because of how many parts of the brain it actually touches. From prediction circuits to reward systems, from cultural learning to deep personal identity, music activates more of the brain than most other human experiences. And music is a perfect blend between biology and culture. It's scientific, it's emotional, it's physical. And it's somehow more than the sum of all of its parts. And the coolest part? Musicians can use all of this. Every chord choice, every interval, every rhythmic twist, every nostalgic callback. You had the power to change someone's emotional experience with their own brain chemistry. That's why music matters. That's why it hits so hard. But that's enough from me. Always remember to call the kettle black, and I will see you in the next video, so go practice. And these videos take a lot of time to do, so I would really appreciate a subscribe, a like, even a comment on how you feel about the video. But without further ado, I'll see you in another video, so bye bye.